Part 2. Now, the Arab population did reject the UN proposal because they felt like it was pro-Zionist and they were giving the majority of the land to the Jewish state, who only made up a third of the population. And of course, you had the British who were facilitating this, that were occupying Jerusalem at the time, which was actually causing a revolt by both groups, and then which caused it to be escalated to the United Nations, which then created this map here. However, part of the stipulations were that the British troops withdraw from Jerusalem, and of course, less than 24 hours after that withdrawal, that's when all hell broke loose. Now, when I say all hell broke loose, exactly 24 hours after Israel was declared a state, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq invaded Israel. Somehow, Israel was able to respond aggressively because they were able to fight off 6 nations, so it's clear they had help somewhere. Let's just keep it a buck. However, this is where the territories come into play, because initially they were given land by the United Nations, but following this war and the fact that they won the war, they were actually able to seize other territories as well that were given to the Palestinians. This crisis caused the United Nations to step in to broker a ceasefire, and part of that deal was giving Israel permanent territory to the land that they initially negotiated, but then they also included the newly occupied land in Palestine. Now, this was an issue for the Palestinians, and it actually caused almost 1 million Palestinians to leave and made Israel a majority Jewish country. In 1956, following the invasion of 1948, there was a situation concerning the Suez Canal when the president of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, nationalized the canal to finance the Aswan Dam project after the US and the UK withdrew their support. Now, this led to a huge crisis with the Suez Canal, in which the UK, the France, and Israel invaded Egypt. And then, of course, that caused the US and the Soviet Union to come in to broker a ceasefire, which obviously didn't last long because, of course, there was another war in 1967. Now, in June of 1967, there was a 6-day war between Israel and primarily Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. Now, the outcome of that war, Israel was able to seize the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip from Egypt, the Golan Heights from Syria, and the West Bank from Jordan, including all of Jerusalem. So this meant that the Palestinians were now under the control of the Israeli government. Then you have the 1972 Munich Olympic attack, where you had 8 members of a Palestinian militant organization who infiltrated the Olympic Village, and they managed to kill 2 members of the Israeli Olympic team, and they took hostage of about 9 or 10 others. There was a movie that was actually made about this. It's called Munich. It came out in 2005, so I would suggest watching it. It's actually a pretty good movie. Now, the next attack would follow less than a year after the Munich massacre during Yom Kippur in 1973. Now, this is very similar to the attack that just happened recently, which happened 50 years and a day after this attack in particular. And the similarities were that the Israeli government were caught off guard, and it also showed their vulnerability. Following the 1973 Yom Kippur War, this is where America steps into the building. And in 1978, then President Jimmy Carter met with Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister, whose name I'm not about to butcher. He met with them at Camp David for 12 days of secret negotiations. Now, it was during this negotiation that a peace treaty was signed. The Sinai Peninsula was returned to Egypt, and the West Bank, Gaza, Golan Heights, and all of Jerusalem were given to Israel. Now, keep in mind, at the time of this signing, over 1 million Palestinians were living on Israeli-occupied land. Plus, Jewish settlers had already started migrating following the 6-day war to Gaza and the West Bank, and this caused many Palestinians to lose their land, which further divided the community. Now, after years of back and forth wars and extremism on both sides, and of course, in my opinion, the Israeli government decided to adapt the colonizer mindset that they wanted to get away from. This is just my opinion. However, this caused an uprising in the Palestinian citizens with the First Intifada against Israel. And of course, from this First Intifada, this is what actually birthed the terrorist organization Hamas. After the First Intifada in 1993, then President Bill Clinton decided to step in and make matters worse, in my opinion, because every time the U.S. or other countries seem to step in, it doesn't really seem to help the Palestinians, and this is just in my opinion. However, Bill Clinton, he negotiated the Oslo Accords, and of course, both leaders, they decided to shake hands, and I believe they won a Nobel Peace Prize a year later for this. This agreement was supposed to be for two independent states by providing a creation of the Palestinian interim government. And that includes the Palestinian National Authority and, of course, eventually the withdrawal of Israeli Defense Forces from parts of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Following the 1993 Accords, there was a second one signed in 1995, which apparently didn't go well because then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a right-wing Israeli extremist who was opposed to the agreement. Oslo II mandated that Israel withdraw from 6 cities and over 400 towns by 2005, and this allowed for an election which Hamas did win against the PLOs. Now, Hamas has made it clear that they are rejecting any type of peace treaties with Israeli government, and they do want to be united with the Palestinian Liberation Organization. However, because the U.S. decided to provide the PLO weapons to get rid of Hamas, and their intelligence was able to discover that a few days prior to that, that's when Hamas completely took over Gaza, which has now divided the Palestinian government, and now Gaza is being governed by Hamas, while the West Bank is still being governed by the Fatah, which are the Palestinian Liberation Organization. After Hamas seized the Gaza Strip in 2007, Israel, along with Egypt, did put a blockade on Gaza, limiting their food, medical supplies, and other needs. And this caused endless back and forth wars throughout the years, including multiple ceasefire attempts by the U.S. during the Obama administration in particular, and Egypt. Here's where it gets interesting, because following the assassination of the former prime minister, the next elected prime minister was none other than the current prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who at the time had been the leader of the Likud party, which is a far right-wing organization, since 1993. By the way, he barely won this election. Under his leadership, he did move the country even further to the right, especially after he was ousted in 1999 for giving some territories in the West Bank back to the Palestine. Then, of course, he was reelected in 2009, but at that time, he was no longer interested in negotiating with the Palestinians. So after that, he became more aggressive. He started attacking Hamas with drone strikes and even assassinated a top Hamas leader in November of 2012. And many believe this attack was to cement support in advance of an election that he was supposed to be reelected in the next 2 months. He was met with some resistance during the Obama administration, but it was the election of Donald Trump in 2016 that was the silver donut. During the Trump administration, he made it clear that the U.S. would recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and then proceeded to move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. Now, this was condemned by all other countries around the world who initially kept their embassies in Tel Aviv. It was also during this administration that things were seen as one-sided, as Trump invited Benjamin Netanyahu to the White House to announce that the U.S. would endorse the Israeli occupation of Golan Heights. And then the Trump administration announced in 2020 that their plan for peace between Israel and Palestine was basically to give Israel more land if Hamas gives up Gaza. But Biden is the one that's supporting genocide. If anything, the Trump administration has further escalated this situation, and if you think otherwise, I will challenge you to make a response with facts, not opinion. I'm running out of time, so I will make a part 3 concluding this, but please pause to read because this is Project 2025, and this is a plan if Trump is reelected. Like for part 3.